everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking what is literally the ultimate symbol of maritime power projection, India's Indigenous aircraft carrier program. We're going to be looking closely at the recently commissioned INS Vikrant, you might hear it called ISC-1, as well as the proposed highly anticipated next vessel, the Vishal, or ISC-2. If you want to understand exactly how modern nations assert their presence across the world's oceans, well, this is exactly where you need to start.
Okay, let's dive into this by defining what we're actually talking about here. What makes these vessels so uniquely powerful on the global stage? An aircraft carrier isn't just a big ship, right? It's a sovereign floating airbase. And that is a really crucial distinction. It allows a nation to project overwhelming air power pretty much anywhere on the globe. The real superpower here is that you're carrying your runway with you. You don't have to ask another country for permission to use their land to launch a strike.
But that brings us to the central mystery of today's explainer. Why is India aggressively pushing for a second indigenous aircraft carrier right now? The Indian Navy just had this massive success with the commissioning of ISC-1. So what's with the immediate, really intense push for ISC-2? What exactly is driving this massive strategic demand behind the scenes?
Here is our roadmap for today's strategic briefing. We're going to break down the history, the economics, and the complex tech debate across 5 parts: sovereign floating airbases, India's carrier timeline, the strategic impact, the STOBAR versus CATOBAR debate, and finally, the future of coercive diplomacy.
Starting off with Section 1, sovereign floating airbases. Let's unpack the specific naval doctrine and the fleet requirements that are actually driving India's maritime strategy.
So, the crucial point here is the Indian Navy's persistent demand for a 3-carrier fleet strategy. And the logic here is surprisingly simple, but it is absolutely essential for consistent coastal coverage. Think about it like a rotation. Step 1, you need 1 carrier deployed on the western seaboard. Step 2, you need a second one deployed simultaneously on the eastern seaboard. And step 3, because these are massive, highly complex machines that take a beating at sea, you always need a third vessel in refit and maintenance.
However, actually getting to that 3-carrier fleet, well, that requires a massive financial balancing act among all the stakeholders. On one hand, you have the Indian Navy demanding the fleet and Cochin Shipyard ready and eager to build the next one. But on the other hand, the Ministry of Defense has to weigh that multi-billion-dollar price tag against other really urgent competing priorities, like, say, the critical need for acquiring new submarines.
Moving to Section 2, India's carrier timeline. To really appreciate this push for ISC-2, we need to trace India's historical journey from operating imported carriers to actually building its own.
For a long time, India relied on imported carriers, right? Ships like the British-built Hermes and the Russian-built Gershkov. But the domestic design phase actually kicked off way back in 1999. Fast forward, and it culminated in that monumental 2022 commissioning of the INS Vikrant. With that single milestone, India officially joined a super elite club of only 6 nations on the entire planet capable of building their own aircraft carriers. And that brings us straight to 2024 and this current forceful push for ISC-2.
Section 3, the strategic impact. Get ready for an exam-focused breakdown here, because there are 3 absolute key pillars driving India's carrier strategy: sea control, deterrence, and economics. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how absolute sea control protects vital lifelines. Look at this. A staggering 80% of India's oil imports flow right through the ocean, specifically through what we call sea lines of communication, or SLOCs. A carrier strike group allows India to essentially dominate the Indian Ocean region, making sure those economic lifelines are safe. Because without absolute sea control, that 80%, it's highly, highly vulnerable.
The second strategic pillar is geopolitical deterrence. Now, looking at the broader context, the Chinese Navy, the plan, is expanding its forces at a very rapid pace. They are explicitly aiming for a blue water fleet that can operate regularly in the Indian Ocean. So from New Delhi's strategic perspective, that 3-carrier fleet we talked about earlier is viewed as the absolute minimum requirement needed to maintain a credible deterrent against any sort of maritime encirclement.
And the third pillar is the sheer economic impact. Just consider this number for a second: 40,000. Building a 40,000-ton aircraft carrier is a colossal industrial exercise. While the INS Vikrant created about 2,000 direct shipyard jobs, it generated a staggering 40,000 indirect jobs across the whole MSME supply chain. These ships aren't just weapons, they are major economic multipliers that boost India's blue economy right from the ground up.
All right, Section 4, the STOBAR versus CATOBAR debate.
Let's zoom into the really granular engineering debate that is currently delaying the final approval for the next carrier.
Basically, this whole debate comes down to how you actually launch the planes off the deck. India's INS Vikrant uses STOBAR. That relies on a simpler ski jump ramp at the very end of the deck. Now, it's effective, but it inherently restricts the maximum weight of the aircraft taking off. Contrast that head-to-head with CATOBAR, which is used by U.S. Nimitz-class supercarriers. CATOBAR uses these incredibly advanced catapults to literally fling heavy planes and drones right off a flat deck. It's a huge technological gap.
And this is what creates a massive military procurement dilemma for IAC-2. Look at the options here. Option 1 is a repeat of the 45,000-ton Vikrant design, using that STOBAR ski jump. It saves money, and you get the ship built much faster. Option 2, a massive 65,000-ton flat-deck carrier equipped with advanced electromagnetic CATOBAR catapults. That gives you vastly superior, future-proof capability, but it comes with astronomical costs and severe time delays. This clash, immediate cost efficiency versus future-proof capability, is exactly the hurdle holding up approval right now.
Finally, Section 5, the future of coercive diplomacy. Let's zoom out a bit. What is the ultimate global geopolitical purpose of these massive floating air bases?
Before we get to that overarching purpose, let's look at the most probable outlook for IAC-2. While the fierce debate over catapults versus ski jumps continues in the background, the Ministry of Defense is actually highly likely to approve a repeat order of the Vikrant class. Why? Well, you simply cannot let the massive infrastructure and dry docks at Cochin shipyards sit idle. You just can't let a newly acquired, multi-billion-dollar national capability like that completely atrophy just because engineers might argue over designs for a decade.
But whether it ends up being a repeat STOBAR or a brand new CATOBAR, the ultimate advantage here is undeniable diplomatic leverage. To quote naval strategists, an aircraft carrier parked off a hostile coast is the ultimate tool of coercive diplomacy, capable of achieving strategic objectives without firing a single shot. That right there is the whole essence of a blue water navy. Presence is power.
Okay, let's wrap this up. I want you to lock in these core concepts from today's briefing. Consider this your visual cheat sheet for maximum retention. We've got the success of INS Vikrant, or IAC-1, the massive technological choke point of STOBAR versus CATOBAR launch systems, the absolute vital need to protect our sea lines of communication, the overarching doctrine of sea control versus sea denial, the logistical necessity of hitting that 3-carrier fleet goal, and of course, the ultimate ambition, fielding a true blue water navy.
So we've seen exactly how India aims to secure the surface of the oceans with these floating sovereign air bases, despite all those complex engineering and financial hurdles. But, securing the surface is really only half the battle. If an aircraft carrier is the undisputed king of the surface, what lurks beneath? What are the underwater predators of Project 75I? Well, we are going to explore exactly that in our next explainer. You absolutely will not want to miss it. See you then.